Hello and welcome to the Shinybees podcast, a podcast for those who like their knitting, comedy and yarn in equally large measures. I'm your host Jo Milmine and this is episode 83, an interview with Helen Lockhart of Ripplescrafts.
I feel a need to laugh again with you, if that's alright. I need a drink, I need a friend.
The Shinybees podcast is delighted to be sponsored by Fluff, Dundee's premier yarn shop. Fluff is based in Blackness Road in Dundee and also has an online shop at www.fluffuph.co.uk. Stockists of both mainstream and indie yarns, including the Wool Kitchen and their very own line of yarns, Rusty Ferret. To find out more, click through the link in the show notes or head to www.fluff.co.uk. Hello everybody and welcome to the show. A warm welcome to any returning listeners I have today. A pleasure to be back with you as always, and of course any new listeners that have found your way to the podcast this week, and if this is your first time with us, I really hope you'll enjoy what you find here. If you like a little bit of random banter, not taking ourselves too seriously, and lots of dogs in comedy knitwear, then this is probably the podcast for you. So how are you? How have you been since last time I spoke to you? I hope you're well, and I hope you're enjoying your knitty week, working on your projects, getting your things ready for your rewind knit along. There's lots of chatter going on in the Ravelry group about that, so it would be great to see you over there if you feel like reliving a previously missed knit along, or indeed one that you took part in and would like to do again. Then we're all about basically gratuitously reliving our favourite knit-alongs. So there is a thread in the group on Ravelry. Head over there and there'll be a link in the show notes to it and you can join in with a bit of fun. I am going to be knitting Lush by Tin Can Knits and I'm not even sorry. It's going to be hand-dyed red yarn. It's going to have sparkles. I'm totally overexcited. So my mission will be to find some lovely buttons to go with it. So other than that, it's all been really fun. I went on a little walkabout last week, went to Milton Keynes. Any of my listeners live in Milton Keynes? It's a bit of an interesting one. I'd never been to Milton Keynes before and I actually weirdly quite liked it. Now for those of you that are not particularly familiar with UK geography or indeed towns, Milton Keynes is a town in, she says, Bedfordshire, I think it is, isn't it? But it's basically kind of on the way to London, and so therefore it counts as down south to me. And my friend Sock Kate, who you've heard on the podcast previously, lives there at the moment. I went to visit her and explored Milton Keynes a little bit. Really strange place. It looked exactly like America. All the roads were really straight and all the buildings were matching in glass, and all of the car parks went around the buildings exactly like they do in the States and in Canada. It was really strange, but I kind of quite liked it. It was a bit of a planning experiment in sort of the 60s with these new towns that they started to build to deal with the kind of burgeoning population. And yeah, loads of roundabouts, loads of dual carriageways, loads of matching glass buildings. Did not look like the UK does at all. Because usually there'll be sort of some really, really old bits. I mean, there are where I live because it was a Roman town. So there'll be some super old bits sort of like dotted around on the main roads. And then there'll be a lot of, particularly in the north, a lot of Victorian architecture. A bit of Georgian, but a lot of Victorian architecture because that's when a lot of the money was being made with the mills and the cotton industry and coal and the Industrial Revolution. So I live in a big Victorian house, as you know, that was, built by a builder, actually, who built the street that I live on. That the builder built this house. So it's not a massive villa. It wasn't a mill owner or anything, but he built all of the mill owners' houses, essentially. So you get a lot of that, and then you'll tend to kind of get everything going on sort of like a spider, almost, or spokes from a wheel from the middle of town sort of going outwards. And this is all kind of like really gridiron and American in Milton Keynes. Very strange. But very, very nice place actually. I really liked it for somewhere that I didn't think I would like because I'm big into my Victoriana. I really enjoyed it. And then in the afternoon, I went across to Countess Ablaze. I do love it there. I would move in. I think she does it on purpose. She gets Tunnocks tea cakes in because I like them. And I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry at all. And it's only about 25 minutes on the train for me to the studio. And then off the train, it's about a 5-minute walk. So I met lovely Laurie, who travelled over from America. She's a listener to the podcast. So send a digital wave to her. She's Laurie Crafty on Ravelry if you want to say hello. And she's been over here for Jolie Creates, formerly Jolie's Kitchen, for her knitting retreat, which took place in Manchester. And obviously, as there was an opportunity to go hang out with some podcast listeners and go to Countess Ablaze, and, you know, as a visitor to the country, she needed to be accompanied. She did. And I was the person to take on that role, you know. It was a tough job. And we had a lovely afternoon chatting and having fun in Lindsay's studio, eating Tunnocks tea cakes and having a jolly, lovely time. Very woolly, got to do some knitting and show Larissa, because Larissa Travel Knitter was there as well. She'd come to visit the Countess and to go to the retreat, and I was knitting with her yarn, so it was lovely to show her that because she hadn't actually kept one for herself. So it was nice to show her how far I got with the project and how it was turning out. So it was a very nice week for me. I hope you guys all had a lovely week too. So now you've caught up with me and everything that's been going on, what have we got to look forward to today? Well, I have an interview for you from one of my favourite storytellers, Helen Lockhart of Ripplescrafts Yarns, who's based in the Highlands of Scotland. And she's formerly of South Africa and moved over to the UK and sort of travelled away further and further north and has found herself now in Assynt in the Highlands. She dyes beautiful hand-dyed yarns that are inspired by her surroundings, and she takes lots of inspiration from the natural world and interprets that into lovely colourways on very luxurious bases. As I said, she's a brilliant storyteller, and if you have seen or are part of her yarn clubs, you'll have experienced that firsthand, and I will pop something in the show notes for you to have a look so you can see it for yourself. But I'm delighted to get her on the show. I've been dying to have her on for ages, and she was an absolute treat to interview. You can find her at ripplescrafts.co.uk if you need to go over there right now to have a look at the yarn, and she'll also be vending at Edinburgh Yarn Festival if you're going. So I heartily recommend you get yourselves a Tunnocks tea cake or a caramel bar, or indeed anything by Tunnocks. It's all delicious and it's definitely not calorific. Get yourself a cup of tea, put your feet up, and we'll crack on with the interview. So I am delighted today to welcome Helen Lockhart of Ripplescrafts Yarns, based in the Scottish Highlands, onto the show. How are you, Helen?
I'm fine, thanks, Jo.
Super. So for those who maybe aren't that familiar with you, I can't think who wouldn't be by now, but if they aren't, can you tell us a little bit about you as a person and how you came to be interested in yarny pursuits?
Well, I was actually born and raised in Southern Africa, and I had most of my education there. But we were back and forth to the UK a lot with my parents for various reasons, and I considered the UK pretty much my second home. My mum was a very proficient sewer and knitter. She made all our clothes and school cardigans, but I only ever acquired her knitting skills. Sewing is still very much a dark art to me. I'm absolutely hopeless when it comes to picking up a needle. I don't remember ever learning how to knit. It just seems to be something that I've always done. And I do remember at school, I must have been no older than about 7 or 8, learning how to, or being taught how to knit socks on 4 needles, which is a great age to teach kids that, because at that age you've got no concept that 4 needles may be more difficult than 2 needles. So I do remember that, but I don't remember actually learning how to cast on, how to do knit or purl. It just seems to have been something I think I absorbed from my mum. We now are living in an area of the Scottish Highlands called Assynt. We came here through quite a long route. We started off in Hampshire and steadily moved further north, and now are about as far north on the British mainland as we can go. And this place has a great history of having a spirit of independence about it, and that suits both our characters and my business. So we're pretty much settled now in Assynt.
Oh, lovely. I think it's, for having lived in South Africa for a while, it's certainly something that's ingrained into the African psyche, is this being really independent and just not being afraid to go out there and try things and almost looking for opportunities to do that rather than the pedestrian lifestyles.
I think that's very true. I think that that is very true, and particularly the places that we lived in were pretty out in the middle of nowhere, and and you had to sort of make do with what you had. You had to be creative with what you had. So, my mum would be constantly adjusting dresses from my older sisters to fit me, or adding bits of fabric to a dress to make it slightly longer, almost like patchwork, but something that looked pretty. You just have to be creative in how you manage things.
Absolutely. So taking it then from moving over to the UK and then kind of migrating north to the Scottish Highlands,
Mhm.
what was the tipping point that turned what had been your hobby for quite a long time, or something you'd known how to do for quite a long time, into a business?
It was really when we moved to Assynt that the business started. We'd had this house for a number of years before we moved here, but we were living in the Scottish borders at the time, and we both had full-time jobs, well-paid jobs. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry in their personnel department, and I managed to make myself redundant, which uh, triggered the need for me to do something else. And at that point, I started to dabble with dyeing yarn after I'd received a dyeing lesson from Lindsay Roberts, who you may know as the Border Tart.
Hmm.
And I was absolutely hooked. And I never considered myself as artistic or even really creative. But yarn dyeing was the artistic and creative niche that I think I'd been looking for some time. And so once we moved north, it became the full-time job for me. And that was back in 2008. And we've really not looked back since.
Oh, it's so exciting and really strange how many people who are working in the industry or dyeing yarn or creating patterns who you wouldn't think would be that creative because they'd come from quite sort of scientific jobs like engineering or architecture or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd been in a variety of jobs, but they were all office-based admin type things. And really none of them, I'd been in the oil industry, pharmaceutical industry, so really none of them particularly creative in any
Mm.
way. So it was a great release to be able to move into a job that was just so creative, and really just filled that need in me for having an outlet for creativity.
Wonderful. Now, via your blog and occasionally you see pictures on Twitter, we get to sort of see your kind of surroundings and your lifestyle in the Highlands. So, can you tell us what does a typical day look like for you?
A typical day starts pretty early in the dye shed. Once the days start to get a bit longer and lighter, I try to be there between 8 and 8:30 so that I can put a whole load of yarn on to soak. Um, and once that's done, it takes a while, so dyeing doesn't start immediately. So once that's on soaking, I make up orders that have come in overnight, and usually dispatch my husband to the post office with those while I get on with dyeing. Um, and again, because I kettle dye everything, it takes quite a long time for the colours to cure. So while pots are bubbling, I spend time on my computer catching up with social media, doing some admin, perhaps doing a bit of tinkering of the website, or perhaps some stock taking. But We also have dogs and hens, so eggs have to be collected and dogs walked. And part of the joy of being self-employed and independent means that we don't have to have a rigid structure. So if the weather is brilliant, we make the most of it and head out for a good long walk. I can always catch up with dyeing when the weather isn't so great. And the lack of rigidity is part of what I love about the indie life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly one of the plus points. So, taking it from that, then, can you tell us a little bit about your creative process? Because I know you are a fantastic storyteller. And I think that is also an African thing. But could you tell us a bit about your creative process when you develop a new colorway?
Yeah, we live in what we consider to be one of the most beautiful parts of the UK. We only have to step outside the door and through the gate, and we're straight into the hills, which is, very lovely, and we try and remember how fortunate we are with having that. In under 10 minutes, we can walk to a beautiful loch, which is surrounded by hills, in one direction, and in the other direction, we can walk to the coast with stunning cliffs and sea vistas. And color is everywhere, even in midwinter when everything looks tired and a little brown. If you look really closely at things, you can see color in the rocks or in the lichen. Even the bracken, which is a menace up here, it just changes color all the time. And it's this that inspires me to create the colorways that I use on my yarns. It usually starts by taking photographs, and I spend a lot of time looking through photographs that I've taken and looking for inspiration. And then I'll choose a particular photograph and transfer some of the colors that stand out in that picture onto the yarn. There's often artistic license, of course, but I try and give an overall view rather than matching up specific colors. But it is inevitably the landscape that inspires me, and our surroundings. Part of the process is lots and lots of testing. Sometimes I never get, or I'm never satisfied with accurately interpreting what I see in the landscape or in a photograph. But at other times it is just right from the start, and I'm happy instantly. But I also need to take into account the way different fibers take dyes, and so what works on one yarn base may not necessarily work on another one. And so there's a lot of trial and error in yarn dyeing, but I do try very hard to convey a sense of place with my dyeing. And I think one of the biggest pleasures for me is when people come up to me and say, "Oh, that particular colorway reminds me so much of the holiday we had in Assynt when I was a child, or last year," or, it just makes my day when people do that. hmm And I think every dyer does it differently. And I think that well, I've always maintained if you give two dyers the same colors to work with, they will produce something very different. And that's part of the fun of it.
Absolutely. So, no journey is ever a smooth one, and running its business has its ups and downs. Can you tell us about a time when things maybe didn't quite go to plan? What happened, and what did you learn as a result of it?
Yeah, failure isn't something I sort of like. I don't like to use that word, and it's going to sound pompous, but I'm not sure I've really failed at anything. But there have obviously been times when things haven't been a great success.
Mhm.
Um, I think my lowest point was when I agreed, after a lot of external pressure, to do a trade show. It was just too early on in my journey as a yarn dyer, and I should never have agreed to do it. And it was a complete disaster for me in terms of sales, and expense. It wasn't entirely my fault. The attendance at the trade show was very poor, and so not many of the stall holders were at all happy. But it taught me to have the courage of my convictions to say no when pressured into doing something that I didn't feel was right for me, or the right market, or the right time. Um, and even though it was pretty much a dismal failure, I did learn a lot from doing it, in terms of how to approach external businesses, and mainly to trust my intuition and know when something isn't right for me.
It's a really important point, and if you get that sort of feeling in your stomach and you're like, this doesn't feel right, I'm not feeling warm and fuzzy, you're
Hmm.
almost always right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But it's so easy, when.
Oh, it is, and especially when you've got external pressure to,
Mhm.
to do something, and everyone else is saying, "Oh, it'll be great for you. It'll be so good for your business," and you're thinking, "I'm not sure about that." It is very hard to say no.
Absolutely. So, taking it from some really good lessons that we can share there to the high point, then, what has been the high point of your journey so far?
Oh, that's another really hard question. Um, I like to try and savor all the little successes along the way, and so picking one is quite hard. But I think that being accepted as a stall holder to Woolfest for the first time was a huge high point for me. That was in 2009, and it was the first big show I'd ever done. This is Woolfest in Cumbria. And I had a tiny little stand, but it was a massive step into the unknown for me, and I loved every single minute of it. And that really set me on the Wool Festival path. And I think doing shows is still one of my favorite things about the business. I love meeting customers, old and new, and it gives me such a kick to see people walking around a festival wearing things that they've made in my yarn in which I've dyed. I just love it. Um, but more recently, I think another high point has been collaborating with my husband Stevan on the yarn notes from Assynt Yarn Club. This began last year in 2015, and it really was a good success with the members who we had last year. So we repeated the collaboration this year. Each month we pick a specific location in Assynt, and Stevan, who is a graduate of Scottish Cultural Studies, he writes up notes about the location that we've chosen. He focuses mainly on the cultural history of the location, but he may talk about anything from geology to sociological significances to archaeology. He writes up the notes, and they get sent along with a picture postcard of the location we've chosen, with a hank of yarn featuring colours which I've interpreted from the photograph. And it's been great fun collaborating with him on this project.
That sounds like a really interesting take on a yarn club, because you sort of almost get into travel via the medium of yarn and learn something, and then you get to knit with it as well.
Yeah, it is interesting reading the comments from members. They quite often they say they open the package, and the first thing they do, because the yarn is always wrapped in tissue paper, the first thing they do is read the notes and look at the picture and try and work out what the colors are going to be of the hank of yarn before they actually unwrap it out of the tissue paper. And they see if they can guess what I've dyed. So it's fun, and it's just that little bit different.
So, what one thing that you know now did you wish you had known when you first picked up a ball of yarn?
Oh, I think one of the biggest things that I have learnt about dyeing yarn is that even though I don't love the results of a particular dye bath, it doesn't mean that somebody else won't. There's such a huge breadth of tastes and likes and dislikes when it comes to color. So even if a hank of yarn maybe languishes in the bottom of a box for a wee while, the day will come when somebody picks it up and falls in love with it. And I wish I'd known that when I started dyeing, and didn't try to please everybody in terms of color, but to experiment, be bold enough to experiment a little bit and maybe have some unusual results. But one day someone's going to come along and say, I've been looking for that particular color for ages.
Hmm.
Um, so there's always somebody out there who'll love it.
Cool. Well, taking it then from what you've learned and so what you wish you'd known, to desert island skeins. If you were going to be marooned on a desert island and you could only take one skein or ball of yarn, what would you be? What would it be and why?
Oh, that is such an unfair question, Joe. That's so hard. But I think it would have to be a 4-ply yarn because 4-ply is just so versatile. Um, you can double it up and use it to, make something thicker out of it, or you can just use it as a 4-ply and it'll do loads of different things. Um, it would probably have to be purple, or at least contain purple. Anyone who knows me knows that that's my favorite color. Um, it's so difficult because as soon as I get in a new yarn base, I love that one. At the moment, I'm really enjoying working with the Buras base, which is a single ply merino yarn. It soaks up the dye beautifully and it reflects the color in such a pleasing way. It's got a real shine to it. It almost looks like it contains silk. But then I think, oh, but what about the Blueface Leicester 4-ply or the Reliable Sock because it's so hardy and multi-purpose. So you see my problem. I can't choose one, Joe. I can't. I would have to be marooned on the island, and they'd have to chuck a ball of yarn at me over the side of the boat, and I'd cope with it.
No, you're going to get acrylic or funfair if you do that, though, don't you?
Um, I'd make sure I was sailing on a boat that only had pure wool.
Nicely done. Fair enough. Oh. So, taking it from indecision about yarn on a desert island to your favourite or go-to resource for yarn craft or business, which one could you not do without?
I know it sounds really lame, but it would be my computer. In terms of the business, I couldn't be without it. I use it so much to research yarn bases, look for new yarns, keep in touch with others, keep up to speed with social media. It's the way I reach my customers, old and new, and yeah, it would have to be my computer.
Yeah, definitely. I'm overly attached to my MacBook now. It's like I can't possibly put this anywhere but right next to me because my life is in there. If it goes, that's it. Doesn't matter
I
if it's
know,
in the cloud, that's I know it's all in the cloud, but it's in the computer. I
I
need
know. I
that one.
I just can't do without it.
Oh, brilliant. So, where is the best place for listeners to come and find you?
Well, the website, my shop site, is at www.ripplescrafts.com. And I will also be at Edinburgh Yarn Festival in March,
Yay.
yeah, yay, where I'll have a lovely large stand. And I'll be at the Highland Wool Festival in Dingwall on the 21st of May, and I'll be at Woolfest in June. And then the only show that's definitely booked beyond June is the Loch Ness Knitting Festival in late September, early October. I'll be there as well. But if folk happen to be holidaying in Assynt, they can always pop into the dye shed if they're passing. They just need to drop me a line first to check that I'm there because it's not a shop, it is my workshop. But if they want to see a bit of how the process works, they're more than welcome to do that.
And if they get lost, one of the locals will take it upon themselves to point it out, I take it.
They do. Yeah. I've had various times when I've had a neighbour from quite far away, from a few miles away, turn up and say, "Oh, I found so and so," and they asked me if I knew where the lady who dyed yarn was, and so I've just brought them around.
I love it. Northern Scotland's amazing.
I know.
So, do you have any parting words of advice then for those who are maybe thinking about getting into the industry?
You absolutely have to have a passion for dyeing yarn. Um, it it goes without saying, but it really is the most important point. And you have to be prepared for quite physical work. I mean, you're lugging, heavy pots of water containing boiling water, usually containing lots of yarn in them. So it's quite physical work, and you have to be prepared to do the business networking side of things as well. And to say nothing, of course, of all the admin associated. So keeping the website up to date, photographing the yarn as accurately as you can to reflect the correct colors. And you do everything from, starting to dye the yarn through the whole process to labeling it, wrapping it up, putting a label on the envelope. All that is part of the job. It's not just the nice bit of standing in front of the pots and adding colour to them. There's a whole gambit of things that have to be done. But, if you're enthusiastic enough and passionate enough, it works.
Lovely. So let's get a bit excited because we like to know what's coming up and have things to look forward to.
Mm-hmm.
What's next for you in your business? What can we look forward to from Ripplescrafts?
Well, I've been working on a couple of collaborations, the most recent being with Kari Westerman. She's just released Frances herself a beautiful shawl pattern. So that has just come out. And also today, due to be released today, is a collaboration I did with Lucy Haig. She has written up a pattern or designed a pattern called Dunedin, which is a shawl pattern to be included in the Edinburgh Yarn Festival magazine, which goes on release today, I think, which has been exciting. But also, Asa Tricosa is using one of my yarn bases, my Sylvan yarn base, which is a merino, silk and yak 4-ply base. She'll be using that for her upcoming book, which is very exciting for me. And then just generally, I'm always on the lookout for new yarn bases, which I think will appeal. My aim at the moment is to find a Scottish grown spun yarn which I can dye in order to produce a truly Scottish product. But that's proving a little elusive at the moment. But I keep looking. And so I never know what might suddenly appear. Yeah, that's about it, I think. Just lots of shows during the year, and the Yarn Club is keeping on going. Folk can join that at any time. They don't have to sign up at the beginning of a year for that. Yeah, I think that's about it, Jo.
Lovely. Well, plenty to look forward to there. And obviously, I'll make sure we put links, appropriate enabling links in the show notes.
Thanks, Jo.
Well, Helen, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and agreeing to an interview. I've been very excited about interviewing you for a while because I know what a wonderful storyteller you are. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's been great.
Well, how good was that? I really enjoyed that interview and I hope you will too. Aside from the odd canine interruption, I think they could hear me talking upstairs and thought they were badly missing out on something. Wish they were, quite frankly. So, that isn't everything. I have something else for you. Helen very kindly has offered for listeners of the podcast a giveaway of a hank of her Stormy Seas colourway, the yarn that was used in the Lucy Haig shawl for the Dunedin pattern that she mentioned, that's just been released on Monday in the Wool Tribe, which is Edinburgh Yarn Festival's hard copy. It's not a catalogue, it's kind of like a pattern collection / magazine that is out now. I'll put a link in the show notes to that. But if you would like an opportunity to win that skein of yarn, head over to the group on Ravelry and put a reply in the thread for this giveaway and let me know which of Helen's colourways is your favourite from ripplescrafts.co.uk. I'll put all the links in that thread so you don't have to kind of jump around everywhere. One of my favourites is called A Slice of Lime, which reminds me of gin, and we all know how much I like gin, and I know how many of you do too. So yes, for your chance to win, head over to Ravelry and put your favourite colourway name in the reply to enter the prize draw. So thank you, a huge thank you to Helen for offering that lovely, lovely, lovely prize as a giveaway. Very exciting. And if you are going to Edinburgh Yarn Festival and you pop by the Ripplescrafts stall, usually Helen's accompanied by the utterly wonderful Dorothy Stewart, who hand weaves the most gorgeous hand-dyed silk, hand-woven scarves you've ever seen. I've got about 4, bought one for my mum. They're absolutely amazing. So have a look at those whilst you're also having a look at Helen's beautiful yarns that will be there. And do tell her, if you've listened to this podcast and you've heard her, please do tell her that you heard the interview as well, because I know she'll be really excited to hear that. She is as much fun in real life as she sounds in this interview. So I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I will look forward to chatting to you all again next week when I have somewhat Irish themed podcast for you. So in the meantime, have a wonderful week, happy crafting, and I'll speak to you all again soon. Bye. You've been listening to the Shinybees podcast, a podcast for those who like their knitting, comedy and yarn in equally large measures. If you'd like to get in contact with me, you can do so via the blog, or I'm Shinybees on Ravelry, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest and Facebook. You can email me at shinybeesinfo@gmail.com. Music for this episode is provided by Music Alley, and it is Adam and the Water Boys and I Need a Drink.
I need a drink.